I am currently mentoring a new teacher, and we sat down together,
my mentor,
and talked about the way he wants the lesson plan or what he's going to teach in class. And so we kind of took a step back, and I thought about how exactly do I lesson plan, and then what would be a good approach to lesson planning for him. And so that's what I want to share with you, is how to lesson plan like a pro. But first, let's go ahead and play that intro. So the first thing I asked him is, what do you want to cover? What do you want to teach? Now, we all have certain standards we got to follow, and there's certain things we got to cover, and that was definitely part of it, kind of keep that in mind. But I told him, you have some flexibility in that. What do you want to cover? For example, we teach history, and there's a joke that we have this other teacher in our district that he'll spend like 3 to 4 weeks on one thing, which we usually spend a few days on, just because he loves talking about that one thing. So as teachers, we have a little bit more flexibility on what we want to invest our time in when it comes to teaching. And so I asked them, the first thing you want to consider is, what do you want to cover? Out of, for example, American Revolutionary War, there's so much to teach on the American Revolutionary War. I focus on certain things more than the teacher next door to me. And so I asked him, what do you want to focus on that? And then once we got that down, then we can actually start going on to step number 2. The second thing you want to do is, once you know what you want to teach or what you want the kids to learn, you want to create a test. It sounds weird, right? Test, that's the last thing you do, but actually that's the first thing you want to do once you have an idea what you want to teach. Because once you create the test, you know what your expectations are of the students, and you know what you want them to learn. And so you create the test. And then once you create the test, all your other lessons are going to focus on moving students towards that knowledge on the test or that skill on the test. But you got to start with the end in mind, and once you have the end in mind, then you can put everything else together. So the second thing you want to do is create a test. So here we go. 1, know what you want to teach. 2, create the test. And the third thing is, how are you going to implement that information? How are you going to get that information to the students, or those skills? How are you going to teach that to the students? And there's a plethora of things you can do. So what I did with him, I actually kind of gave him, this is the test that we're going to have. This test I've been given in the past. You're more welcome to use it. And here are the assignments that I've done in the past. You're more welcome to use those. However, I would highly recommend, this is what I recommend to him, you can go through this stuff. Go through the lessons. But if they don't feel right for you, then don't use them, because we each have our own little take on things, our own little style, and what I might like doing in a lesson, he may not, and vice versa. And so I said, okay, so now I give you all this information. Now do some research. Go through the internet, watch some videos, teacher pay, whatever you want to do. Look for lesson plans you think that are more your style, that you would like to do. And so here are some things that quickly top of my head that you could probably do. For example, there's notes we have, there's different activities, there's group work, there's scavenger hunts, there's videos you can watch, you name it, a variety of things. But I say go through all that and see what suits you. And that is how you're going to get the information or the skills to the students. So we're now on to step 4, and that is organize the information, the lessons in a logical order. Seems pretty obvious, right? But there is, if you look at, no matter what you're teaching, there's logical order. So let's say history, for example. History, logical order, you can go by dates, right? What came first, second, third, or cause and effect. You could do that. Or you can group it by a certain kind of a belief or a pattern you're trying to get the students to recognize. There's different ways of organizing, but make sure it makes logical sense. Math, I mean, what do you got for math? Before you can get to multiplication, you got to get to addition and subtraction. And before you get to division, you get to multiplication now. So there's logical steps to that as well as English and science. So each thing has its own logical step to it. And so you want to make sure whatever the skills you're trying to create or whatever information you're trying to give the students, make sure it follows a certain order that would make sense to anybody who is learning the stuff. The next thing you want to do is, now that you know the information you want the students to have and you put it in a logical order, you want to go one step deeper, and that would be to make sure the lessons are compatible with each other. Make sure there's an overall arching theme to it, and make sure it flows properly. So for example, he was teaching about the Declaration of Independence. And so what he did is he had an activity about the Declaration of Independence where you take the different phrases from it and you comment on it and draw pictures about it. So you actually explore the document itself. And then the following day, he had notes about the Declaration of Independence, when it was created, why it was created, and so forth. And a simple suggestion I had is, those all are part of that Declaration of Independence, so that's perfect. But you're probably better off giving them the notes first. Because if you give them the notes first, you give them the basic foundation, the information, and then from there, the activity reinforces what they learn. And so once you have a logical order put out, look at it one more time and just make sure each lessons are compatible with each other, they support each other, and for in our case, give the information first before you do the activity to support it. And then number 6, this is probably the hardest part of lesson planning, and this really is where you will lose students if it's not done properly. And so you have to dive into the actual lesson itself that day. You have to think through as much as you can how that's going to unfold in your classroom. So here you go. So once we created those lessons, I sat down with him and said, okay, we've got the big format. We know where it's going. We know where we're going, the test, right? We got the organization. Now we got the, honed in a little bit more, making sure the lessons are compatible. Now let's dive into each day specifically. And I want you to think through. And so here's the questions I asked him. What are the students going to be doing when they first come into class? There's going to be a kind of warm-up for them. And if there is a warm-up, how are you going to make that part of the overall lesson? Is it going to be like a warm-up they do all week and they add to it and bring the paper back out again? Is that warm-up going to be part of the activity? If you're doing a worksheet, are you able to put that warm-up part of the worksheet so you don't have 2 or 3 different pieces of paper? So really think through that warm-up. And then, of course, how long are you given for that warm-up? So you can see, this is just the warm-up, right? We haven't actually got to the full-on lesson itself, but there's so many questions to ask that you want to make sure that the clearer you are, when it actually comes time to implement a classroom, the smoother the process is going to be. So think about all those things, and that's just, for example, the warm-up, right? Let's continue with some more examples. So let's say, for example, you're doing notes or maybe an activity. When are you going to pass out the activity? Are you going to pass it out while the students are doing their warm-ups? Are you going to wait till the warm-ups are done, then pass out the activity? How are you going to pass out the activity? You're going to walk around, you're going to have another student do it. Those are the things you want to think about. When you do the actual assignment itself, if it's a worksheet, are you going to chunk it, meaning that you do a little bit at a time on the worksheet, or are you going to give it all to them and tell them you got so much long to work on it? And so those are all things you want to think. That's just the activity itself or the notes itself. And then towards the end of the class, I would ask this question right here. Once they're done with the activity, how are you going to collect it? And once you do collect it, it needs to be stapled, more than one piece of paper. How are you going to let the students staple the work together without there be some sort of chaos? How are you going to collect the work? Is it going to be turned in all at once? Is some of it going to be due the next day? How do you go? And then once you have the work, how are you going to grade it? How many points are you going to assign for this activity? And then when are you going to grade it? That's another big part of it. Because if you have to grade something every single day, oh man, there go your evening. So how are you going to grade it? When are you going to grade it? How much you're going to assign each points? All of those things you want to consider. And then how soon do you want to get the work back to the students? Whew, that's a lot of information, man. I'm exhausted just talking about it, right? The good news is once you've been doing this a while, I've been doing this for a long time, right, 20 years, and so this is second nature to me. But even once you actually start doing it and getting into it, you find yourself developing this sort of rhythm, right? And certain routines you have, and all these things kind of get taken care of naturally, or at least, you start to ingrain it as part of your overall daily process. But at first, these are all things you got to think through. But wait, there's more. I asked them some additional questions that you have to consider. What happens if you finish the assignment early? What are students going to work on? The last thing you want to do is have 10, 15 minutes of class left over and nothing for the students to do. So you want to plan for that. And what happens if the assignment takes longer than you thought it was going to and it falls into the next day? How are you going to wrap that into the next day's work as well? So those are other things to consider. And another one, what happens if a student's absent? How are they going to get the work? What are you going to do so they can make up the points or make up the work? These are all things you got to consider. Now, the last thing you're going to do, once you do all this planning, this is really the meat and potatoes of it. This is really how lesson planning is done. Now, if your school's like my school and your district's like my district, they have a certain format that you're supposed to fill in, lesson planning, right? That shows you meet the standards and maybe an essential question and how do you know and they're going to have all this other, I call it fluff in there, right? They want to make sure you put in there the correct verbiage and all that. And so you're going to have to play that game. But once this part is done and you really know how each day is going to unfold, then it should be as simple as putting that into the document, whatever document they want, so that way you satisfy your schools or your district's requirements. But the real essence of lesson planning is what we just covered, and thinking through all those questions and planning it out so it makes a smooth transition from one assignment to the next assignment with the overall goal of getting to that information, the skills on the test. And the best part about it, once again, once you really start doing this over and over and over again, you're going to develop those rhythms. How long it takes, that's hard to tell, right? Each person's different. But eventually you get to the point where you develop that rhythm, it becomes second nature, and then this lesson planning, man, you'll be able to lesson plan like a pro.
Thank you for watching the video. If you like what you saw, please hit the subscribe button or click on one of the other links.